Landlords are paying thousands of dollars of their own money to hire lawyers during eviction proceedings, on top of thousands of dollars in lost rent and damages done by the tenant. But some tenant groups say that's unfair because they didn't get a free lawyer. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and once again, it's covering the topic of how some groups, they want tenants to have free lawyers for the whole eviction battle, okay? So, as I've mentioned many times before, 95% of all eviction cases, and this is across the entire United States, are due to non-payment of rent. The other 5%, there's a little bit more nuance, but for 95% of cases, it is so simple. It is a super easy thing to establish that, hey, this person didn't pay the money that they promised that they would pay, or they didn't pay it on time. So there's nothing to fight. There's absolutely nothing to fight. And providing a person with a free lawyer, when you're talking about two individual parties going in a civil suit against each other, it makes absolutely no sense. Especially when we're talking about the government being the one to provide that lawyer for someone. So what they're saying is, hey, we think that the landlord should have to pay all their own legal fees, be it thousands of dollars or whatever it costs, right? And on top of losing the rental income, of course, right? To go through the eviction process, but we're gonna give this tenant, give them free, lawyers so that they can fight a case that they're not gonna win. And it is just filled with just a disastrous corruption by these attorneys. These attorneys who file useless motions and drag the process out as long as possible. And meanwhile, the landlord's continuing to lose more and more money as the process goes along. So as you can tell, I am very much opposed to this sort of thing. So in the article I'm covering today, they're saying, oh, it's just not fair. It's unjust. It's unjust that the landlords have attorneys that they paid for, mind you, while the tenants don't. And I'm like, well, if the tenant wants an attorney, maybe they should pay for an attorney. Okay, that's my opinion. If you want an attorney to represent you during eviction proceedings, you pay for the attorney. Why is the taxpayer on the hook to cover somebody who can't pay their bills in 95% of cases? Okay, there's nothing to fight. Why is the taxpayer on the hook for two individual parties, being in a civil suit? That is ridiculous. This is all ridiculous. And they say, oh, well, it's because we don't want people to be unhoused. And I'm like, well, why is it the taxpayer's responsibility to pay people's rent for them, it's not even the taxpayer paying it. It is the landlord making sure that these people stay housed even though they're not getting paid. It is the taxpayer paying a bunch of greedy lawyers to fight lawsuits that they can't win. And the only thing this really does is it creates more incentive for landlords to not want to be in business. So you're going to drive landlords out of business. There's going to be continued shortage of housing. Things only get worse for the tenants involved, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Do you think it's a good idea to provide a lawyer, a taxpayer-provided lawyer to tenants so they can fight the eviction process? Tell me why. Tell me why it's a good idea for a landlord to have to pay thousands of dollars in some cases out of their own pocket while the tenant don't have to pay nothing and they didn't pay the rent on top of it. Please explain to me what common sense, what logic there is in this. Oh, well, maybe the tenant lost their job. Losing your job is not an excuse for not paying the rent, okay? That is not the responsibility of the landlord to provide free housing for everybody who lost their job. That's not, okay? It's just the fact of life that sometimes you lose your job and you got to get up and you got to find some other way to make the rent. Anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from the Los Angeles Times, and it says, letters to the editor. Landlords have attorneys. Renters almost always don't. That's a recipe for injustice. Yeah, injustice. Injustice that one group has to pay thousands of dollars. So your solution is, hey, you're still going to have to pay those thousands of dollars, but now we're going to give this tenant something for free. Yeah, more socialized nonsense. Anyway, let's get into it. Economist George Zuo clearly does not understand the purpose of renters' right to counsel, something that 17 cities, 4 states, and 1 county across the nation have already codified. Zuo prefers instead for the money that would fund renters' counsel to go directly into the pockets of landlords, a one-sided solution that doesn't work when many landlords refuse rental assistance because they'd prefer to raise the rents. And you know what? The landlord shouldn't have to take the money, okay? If you don't pay the rent and there's no evidence that you're going to be paying on time going into the future, why can't we go ahead with the eviction process? Okay, now that is a nice solution right there. Instead of paying a bunch of lawyers money to try to fight the eviction case, yeah, use that money for rental assistance. And so those landlords who do want to keep people housed in their buildings, right, at least they'll be able to be compensated for doing so, whether it be temporary or not. Okay, so yeah, that's probably a better alternative than paying for lawyers to drag the process out and file a bunch of useless motions so the landlord continues to lose more money, so that the tenant it continues to accumulate more debt. It's ridiculous. A 2019 report by the Los Angeles Right to Counsel Coalition found that 95% of landlords and only 3% of tenants are represented by lawyers in Los Angeles eviction court. A certain recipe for injustice. Now, don't act like these landlords aren't paying for their own attorneys, okay? That's the biggest gripe I got. It's like they forget that fact. They're like, well, it's not fair. It's like, they have lawyers and these people don't. Like, well, that's because they're paying for their own lawyers. We're paying for our own lawyers. Goodness, what a joke. Not all non-payment evictions are valid. Many are pretextual, procedurally invalid, or the result of uninhabitable conditions. Right to counsel is less about access to justice, racial justice, and homelessness prevention, which is why the city and county of LA are investing in the tenant assistance program, stayhousedla.org. So the first thing they do is they try to invalidate all of the non-payment actions, right? By saying that, oh, many of them are procedurally invalid. It might be procedurally invalid, but that doesn't change the fact that the person did not pay the money that they agreed to pay. So once they get the procedure correct, well, the case still stands. The second issue they bring up is due to uninhabitable conditions, right? Well, here's the thing, right? You just can't decide to just stop paying rent. Say, oh, well, my place is uninhabitable, and just stop paying, right? There's a process to go through in order to prove if this is true or not. And even if it is true, that makes up an absolutely minuscule number of the eviction cases, okay? Probably of the huge number of eviction cases, that's probably less than 1% that fall under these little exceptions. So for the grand majority of these cases, we're talking about properties that are kept in good condition, where the landlord is doing everything right, and then these people still didn't pay, okay? So there's absolutely nothing to fight, yet you want to screw the landlord over by dragging a process out when there's nothing for the tenant to do other than pay the money that they owe. That's it, okay? And then, you know what, you use these excuses about justice, racial justice, and equity for all, and it's just a cover-up for the fact that you know there is no argument. There is no reason whatsoever for people to be provided free lawyers to fight cases where they're just 100% wrong. One thing Zuo got right is the need for good eviction diversion programs, something tenant advocates have been asking the court and city and county officials to discuss for some time. Los Angeles tenants need meaningful access to the justice system. And you know what? If a landlord chooses to participate in, some sort of mediation in order to get paid or to get that tenant up out of the property quicker so that they can re-rent it, then that's fine. I got no problem with that sort of mediation, right? If the landlord chooses not to participate, that should be fine as well. My big issue is that these lawyers, right, are only going to make the process worse. They're going to make it slower. They're going to make it harder to remove the tenants. They're going to basically bankrupt a lot of, especially small mom and pop landlords. And they're going to make the cost of renting for tenants, for the other tenants, much more expensive. So I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think that most landlords think this is a good idea. If you disagree with me, go ahead, put a comment down below and tell me why I'm wrong, okay? I've seen a few comments from tenants in my comments section where they argued that this will be overall a beneficial thing, and I have no problem with, counter arguments to my points, right? But it's something that we can definitely discuss.